Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mike Tidwell. I'm Executive Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and of our sister political organization, CCAN Action Fund, who is the actual sponsor of tonight's call. You are dialed into one of the first nationwide Zoom calls to take stock of what last week's election means for the climate movement and our nation. You'll hear shortly from U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, Mr. Bill McKibben, author and co-founder of 350.org, Andres Jimenez, director of Green 2.0, plus CCAN Action Fund state directors, Kim Germain and Jamie DeMarco. Plus, we'll take questions from you. Our mission at CCAN Action Fund is to bring clean energy solutions to the climate crisis throughout the region of Maryland, Virginia, and DC, while working nationally with partner groups from coast to coast to boost state and federal climate policies everywhere. Since the majority of our 100,000 supporters occupy or surround in close proximity our capital city of Washington, D.C., we like to think of ourselves as the nation's first responders on climate. We're the first to turn up in person for climate actions in D.C., first to send out the call from this region to our friends coast to coast for strong national action and rapid response. So in that spirit, we are thrilled to host tonight's call, the biggest Zoom call in our history with guests from our region and even more nationwide. So let's get to it. First of all, Joe Biden won, Donald Trump lost. We have a declared victor, so we can all be happy about that. So go ahead, everybody exhale. We can celebrate. I mean, this is an amazing feeling, and it's so great to celebrate and share this moment with all of you on this call. The political victory, of course, is not complete. We still have a chance to win the U.S. Senate. Thank you, Georgia runoffs. But holy cow, we already won the biggest prize. The climate arsonist, Donald Trump, is toast. That really happened. For another 4 years of Donald Trump would have wrecked the global atmosphere, period. Now, our next president, Joe Biden, can quickly rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, rebuild the US EPA, and bring science and facts back to policy. Like President Obama, Biden can take executive actions to lower carbon emissions nationwide while giving federal support to specific state initiatives everywhere, from California to Virginia. On Tuesday, election night, things were agonizing. I know they were. Then momentum swung our way as the week went on, and we still might win the U.S. Senate after the Georgia runoff elections on January 5th. But in the meantime, how could 71 million people vote for a climate-denying, racist, lying incumbent president? Obviously, we still have work to do. Conversely, 75.5 million people did vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the most ever for a presidential ticket. And the climate platform that they ran on is amazing. It includes 100% clean electricity nationwide by 2035, with net zero emissions for the whole economy by 2050. And it puts equity for disadvantaged communities at the center of all climate policies. Now, with time running out on climate change, we need to help our friends in Georgia elect 2 Democratic Senate candidates to give Democrats control of Congress. And we need to work with and put pressure on President-elect Joe Biden to do all he can, with or without the Senate, to move our nation forward on climate policy. So now I want to turn to our first speaker tonight, U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Senator Van Hollen is perhaps the most decorated environmental legislator in the history of the Maryland State House, where he served in the state Senate. He then served 14 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, where 3 times he introduced transformative climate legislation to cap greenhouse gas emissions and return carbon rebates to all Americans. Now in the U.S. Senate since 2018, he continues to be a climate champion, where he sits on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Appropriations Committee. Senator Van Hollen, welcome, and please give us your general take on the election and where we go from here with the new Biden administration and the still unresolved Georgia Senate races.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you for that warm introduction. Most of all, thank you for your tenacious and visionary leadership with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And you've grown that great organization over so many years. We're proud of the work that you've done in the Chesapeake Bay region, but also recognize from the start, climate's obviously in the name, that in order to save the Chesapeake Bay region and our country and the world, we need to address on an urgent basis climate change. It's great to be here with Bill McKibben and Andre Jimenez. It's also great to see Kim and Jamie. And to all of you who are joining us from all over the country, like Mike, I want to start with the good news, which is we won this presidential election. We're watching, the death throes of the Trump administration. He's, of course, lashing out. It's a sad and pathetic sight to see. It is dangerous because he's leading so many of his supporters to believe that he was cheated out of an election, that he lost fair and square. But the bottom line is on January 20th, we will have Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. And it will begin a new era of U.S. leadership in the area of climate change. And I'm going to talk about the Georgia races in a minute and what the Congress can and can't do, depending on various outcomes. But I do want to emphasize all the things that President Biden can do using his executive authority. Starting, of course, with rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, which he will do right out of the box, reassert American leadership, work with others around the world to meet this urgent global challenge. But then he, of course, can get about quickly reversing the Trump executive actions that took us in the wrong direction, and even more replacing them with progressive actions to move us in the right direction. I just want to tick off a couple of them because I think it's important that we all focus on what can be done before we talk about some of the challenges in the Congress. And what can be done is that on day one, week one, we can begin to reverse the efforts of the Trump administration to eliminate the methane emissions rules and instead put in place aggressive new rules to limit methane emissions, which we all know are very potent greenhouse gases. The Trump administration from day one launched an attack on the automobile emission standards and the state of California's ability to have their own standard, which is a standard that Maryland has attached itself to. And so in addition to reversing what the Trump administration has done, the Biden administration can, of course, move forward and really focus on clean cars and follow and really give California the ability to set the standards as they have, and other states can follow. Other areas, of course, include building standards, appliance standards, making sure that we do not drill for oil and gas on public lands, and really use the purchasing power of the federal government, which is very sizable, as we all know, just looking at the military alone, but taking the whole federal government. The purchasing power is huge, and making sure that we're investing federal taxpayer dollars in a way that moves us toward a clean energy and more energy efficient country. So that's just a partial list of what a Biden-Harris administration can do on their own through executive action. When it comes to more broad economy-wide measures, we want to push forward in Congress. But before I mention that, I want to mention the old Clean Power Rule, because if we can't get congressional action, and that is, of course, the preferred approach, you can take broader regulatory actions, as we did with the Clean Power Rule. I think we're looking at a number of other sections of the Clean Air Act beyond those that were applied by the Obama administration for the purpose of implementing an updated new generation of a Clean Power Rule. But that is certainly something that the Biden administration can pursue if it decides that it cannot do a better job, a more efficient job going through Congress. So let me briefly talk about the Congress. There's no doubt it was a disappointment that the Democrats did not win a majority in the Senate. For the purposes of this call, I will just say, because the advocates for clean energy did not win a majority in the Senate. The believers that we need to tackle climate change have not yet won a majority in the Senate. We got the climate denier out of the White House, but we still have way too many of them in the United States Senate. And obviously, if we win, if the Democrats win, if candidates who care about the climate win in Georgia, then we will have a majority, a bare majority, but with Vice President Harris casting the deciding vote in the Senate, we will have a majority that wants to move forward on aggressive efforts to deal with climate change. And that would allow us, of course, to move forward on the very robust and, as Mike said, historically sort of visionary plan that that Biden and Harris have put forward. If we don't have the majority in the United States Senate, obviously it will be more difficult and challenging to pass important legislation. Mike mentioned a bill that he and I and Bill McKibben and others have been working on for years to put a price on carbon, to rebate the proceeds to homeowners, to make sure that we compensate them for any additional costs, and other important legislation, including all the investment portions of the Green New Deal. We want to move forward on that. And I think that I know Joe Biden is going to work very hard, regardless of who controls the Senate, to pass that important measure. And I will say, and I'll end with this, the infrastructure investments, modernizing our infrastructure is a bipartisan priority. Now, the focus on green infrastructure has, of course, been more of a Democratic priority, but there are ways to try to marry up the two. And we look forward to working with all of you on this call to make that happen. Things are changing. I think you probably saw the action taken by the Federal Reserve today, for the first time recognizing the climate as a big risk that's laying out there. I want to give a shout out. I'm a member of the banking committee, and I've worked with others, but Brian Schatz from Hawaii and Sheldon Whitehouse and I, among others, have been very focused on bringing companies in and talking to the Federal Reserve as well about recognizing this risk. And to the extent it gets factored into people's decision making, like a price on carbon, it obviously impacts people's decision and makes them more conscious about the need to address our climate. So let me stop there, Mike. Thank all of you for being part of this urgent, but also a very, very happy discussion where we have a new opportunity to move forward.
And thank you, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. And before, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. But before I do that, I did want to give our listeners tonight a couple of links for how you can help out in Georgia in the Senate races. I know a lot of people on this call are really eager to help out in Georgia, the same way you helped out in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and elsewhere. So CCAN Action Fund does not coordinate with the Georgia Democratic Party itself, but if that's what you want to do, just turn to Google, and I'm sure you'll be quickly on your way to help on that side of the politics. In the meantime, we would encourage you to sign up for Stacey Abrams' organization, Fair Fight, the Fair Fight campaign, and you can sign up and be involved in that voter registration, voter turnout campaign at fairfight.com/join-our-fight. And Jamie DeMarco is posting that into the chat right now. So that's fairfight.com/join-our-fight. And also you can write letters through Vote Forward at www.votefwd.org. That's being posted into the chat as well. CCAN Action Fund, we wrote 17,000 letters, mostly to voters in Pennsylvania for the general election. And now Vote Forward is going to continue their campaign in Georgia. So sign up for that. They'll be in touch with you soon. Also, stay in touch with CCAN Action Fund by signing up for our alerts at ccanactionfund.org. That's ccanactionfund.org. If you don't already get our alerts, Jamie, can you post that into the chat as well? So, Senator Van Hollen, a question that I think a lot of people have been wondering is, why were the polls so wrong about Dems gaining seats in the Senate? And how do you think we can overcome this quote unquote Trump bump to win in Georgia and in 2022 and the Senate races in 2022? What happened and what do we need to do?
Well, let me start with Georgia, and then I'll talk about the polls, because in Georgia, it still appears that Joe Biden is on a path toward victory in Georgia. And we know that both these seats are in a runoff. We expect them both. We know that Reverend Raphael Warnock will be in runoff, and we also expect the Purdue seat to be in a runoff situation. So as I look at a special election, and I used to chair the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee in the last cycle, and I did 2 rounds at the DCCC as well. And runoffs, like general elections, but even more so, are a reflection of people's intensity and energy and ability to get out the vote. The reason I say that is even more than on normal election day. Obviously, a presidential election is a big national event. Everybody's focused on it. The media is focused on it. And so that helps bring voters to the polls just because it's a big national moment. Special elections are different. They really depend on everybody being able to get their voters out to the polls for a very specific purpose. And in Georgia, obviously, it's the Senate races. There are 2 important factors here. One is, of course, Donald Trump. Whether we like it or not, and I don't like it, he did bring a lot of voters to the polls with him in a lot of these states. He's obviously not on the ballot in this upcoming special election. And so his voters may be less motivated. Second, we need to make sure that we fully charge our voters as to what's at stake. I did events, I've done events, fundraising events for Reverend Raphael Warnock and participated in one for Jon Ossoff. These are really strong candidates, but we need to be getting out the vote. And by the way, early voting starts in Georgia in the coming weeks. And so we need to take advantage of the early vote just as people took advantage of using that important and safe method of voting in presidential elections. So if this is, of course, an essential thing to do if we want to be in a position to pass really strong legislation through the Senate on climate change. It's not that we can't do it without Georgia, but I will tell you, our path will be made much easier, of course, with a Democratic majority in the Senate. So I wanted to mention Georgia first because it looks like Biden won there. And I want to get to the polls. The polls were obviously way off. And that's going to require a major reevaluation of the techniques people use to measure, public sentiment. I must say, even in recent years, I've been more skeptical of polls. I use them as one tool at the DSCC, but you got to use them among others. And the other pattern, though, Mike, and I'll end with this, is in presidential election years, we've seen this pattern where a Democratic candidate for president wins the state, the Democratic candidate for Senate wins the state. And the reverse is true. That was 100% true in 2016. This time, the only state that has escaped that was Susan Collins in Maine. So between 2016 and 2020, the only Senate candidate who won a Senate seat in a state that the presidential candidate of the opposite party won has been Susan Collins. That's why I wanted to emphasize at the beginning that Biden, it looks like, will win Georgia.
Thank you, Senator. And I know you're busy. If you can stick around, we're going to come back to Q&A later in the hour. But I really want to thank you for making time. You were at the top of our list to try to make sense of this election. So I really appreciate your time. Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Thank you very much. And please, if you just joined this call, you've dialed into the CCAN Action Fund's post-election debrief with Chris Van Hollen, Bill McKibben, Andres Jimenez, and others. And we're discussing climate policy in the wake of the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris victory last week. Our next speaker is the legendary Bill McKibben, who literally wrote the book on global warming in 1989 with his seminal work, The End of Nature. That book changed my life and led me to form the Chesapeake Climate Action Network years later. Bill is also the founder of 350.org and teaches at Middlebury College, not far from his home in Vermont. Bill, it's great to have you with us tonight. And Stacy, if you can switch the Zoom to Bill. Bill, what do you make of the election and where do we go from here?
Well, first of all, Mike, thank you for having me. Thanks to your crew at CCAN doing great work as always. It's really good to see Andres and to see Chris, to see Senator Van Hollen is always a pleasure. And, you know, first thing to be said is we do have important work to do in the weeks ahead in Georgia. You know, these are not just important seats to win, these are important people. Raphael Warnock is in the pulpit of the church where Dr. King preached for many years. He would be a remarkable addition to our national life in the most profound way. And I would just add one small note, since I'm a little bit further north than y'all up in Vermont. Don't completely sleep on Alaska either. They're going to be counting votes there next week, and Dr. Al Gross is a hell of a good candidate, and fingers crossed. So let me talk for a minute about the election. I thought what was really important was that we had a huge turnout. Pretty much everybody voted. And Joe Biden ran very strongly and proudly on the idea that we were going to have to deal with climate change. And he said he touched the third rail. He did not shilly-shally around like people have tended to do. He said in his last debate, we were going to have to transition away from the oil industry. And he followed that up with 4 or 5 closing ads about climate change in the last week of the campaign. So it was the first, let's be honest, the first presidential candidate ever to really make this an issue to run on and not to run away from. And he was not hurt by it. He carried Colorado, he carried Pennsylvania, he carried New Mexico, he carried state after state where the oil industry remains a big deal and so on and so forth. And I think that helps us reset, recalibrate our sense of where the American people are and what it's possible to imagine doing. Having said that, I got to say, I think that it's, as the way that things are lining up, it's going to be hard to get the really big pieces of legislation that we desperately wanted and we desperately need. Even if we manage to get a 50-50 Senate out of Georgia, Senator Manchin from next door to y'all in West Virginia said today that he would never vote against, vote to end the filibuster. So there's no smooth and easy sailing ahead. So that's a shame because we need huge action fast. So looking at it from a movement point of view, what I'm always interested in is how do elected officials and people who build movements figure out how to sync up in ways that allow us to make huge change. Sometimes that's legislative, and hopefully that'll be, Senator Van Hollen and others will figure out ways to get legislation through that will make a big difference. And sometimes it's other ways. Senator Van Hollen said at the end of his talk, mentioned what happened at the Fed today. And I think that that's a good clue about where we're going to be going and what we can do together. Mike, as you know, I've spent much of the last year, I've worked hard in the electoral contest, but um, um, I've worked at least as hard in the last year on our financial system. I began 2020 in your neck of the woods, getting arrested at the Chase Bank branch nearest the Capitol with some others to launch this Stop the Money Pipeline campaign. And so I think it's going to be really important for people in the Biden administration to figure out how to use every lever at the Fed, every lever at the SEC, every lever at the Treasury Department to put pressure on Wall Street to make change, and for the rest of us to figure out how to back up those moves in a big way. And I say that in part because Washington's really only one of two power centers in this country, and the other one is Wall Street. And from a climate point of view, the advantage of Wall Street is that it moves fast when it moves. Something happens and the results are reflected in hours on markets around the world. Information travels really fast. You don't have the problem of legacy power. The Wall Street was done with coal long before Washington was. And it looks like Wall Street's getting ready to be done with oil and gas as quickly as it can, just because it's clear there's not money for them to make there anymore. The money's coming in the renewables, and which is precisely what we need. So figuring out how we can align angry activists around America with enough legislative leverage in Washington to really help us cut off the supply of money to the fossil fuel industry is going to be a key thing in the time ahead. And I'll add too that if we can't get everything that we need out of Washington, we've got to make sure we don't get any backsliding. That's why, for instance, people are working so hard already right now to make sure that Ernie Moniz is not the Secretary of Energy, and kind of brings us back to all of the above 2.0 and so on and so forth. I trust that we will win these kind of fights because I can't imagine really what the upside would be to the Biden administration to, fighting with the environmental movement, with people like the Sunrise Movement, who've done so much to put them in power. And so I think we're going to have to be nimble, flexible, and pick our spots, make the fights all the places that we can. And we're going to have to remember that it's really important that the climate justice movement is about justice as well as about climate, and make sure that the environmental movement is there to help in the other justice battles that are going to be fought in this Congress and in Washington in the years ahead. We're talking about racial equality, we're talking about immigration, we're talking about economic equality. If we're serious about climate justice, then those are parts of this fight too. We have some room to help here, to push hard, and I hope and trust that we will.
Well, Bill, one quick question, and thank you so much, Bill McKibben. And I wanted to give the link for Stop the Money Pipeline. So that's www.stopthemoneypipeline.com. Check it out. You can get involved in that movement. And Bill, I got arrested with you in late August 2011 outside the White House when we kicked off the Keystone XL fight. 1,253 of us, I think, over 2 weeks got arrested. And before that, no one was working to stop any pipelines anywhere. Now people are working to stop pipelines and new coal plants everywhere. Do you anticipate that kind of street action and civil disobedience to further these financial campaigns, legislative campaigns? Is there more of that in our future?
Oh, absolutely. And look, first thing to be said is, one piece of good news is Joe Biden has said absolutely no shadow of a doubt, no question about it, that he looked forward to signing, to revoking the permit for Keystone XL. So that fight that you started long ago, Mike, is, unless something goes very awry, is going to be settled soon. And what was important about that was, as you indicated, not so much that we stopped this one pipeline, though that's pretty important considering how big it is. It's that it demonstrated for the first time that it was really possible to stand up to big fossil, And so now we fight every pipeline. A big fight at the moment in Line 3 up in Minnesota. People should join in at the moment. And I just tweeted out about the way to help join in this fight this week. But every frac well, every coal mine, every, and around the world. And we win a ton of these fights, and they really matter. And they're incredibly important ways to help push organizing, to help us build as a movement. So yeah, I mean, it's a little hard right now to exactly figure out how you send people to jail, because the last thing that American prisons need is more people arriving from the outside bearing infections, So it's really not okay as part of our kind of commitment to, prison justice to be, filling prisons with people who might be bearing COVID. But other than that, we can figure out lots of ways to make this a ever rowdier operation. I will add that when we fought the Keystone Pipeline, we were careful to make sure that people understood we weren't fighting Obama. We were figuring out ways to give Obama the space to do what he needed to do. And we told, of those 1,254 people who got arrested at that first, at the time was the biggest civil disobedience action in decades in this country, most of them were wearing Obama buttons when they got arrested, So we may need to be thinking about that too, because, it's not like we have such a robust and enormous majority and power and everything in Washington that we can afford to undercut it either. We've got to figure out ways to do what we need to do that support, that give it the room, that give the Bidens et al. Room to do the things that we hope they want to do.
Great. And Bill, I hope you can stick around. We're going to try to squeeze some more questions toward the end of this call. You mentioned justice, the issue of justice, and that's a great segue. Our next speaker is Andres Jimenez. He is a long-time community advocate in his state of Virginia, and now has broadened his impact nationally to serve as executive director of Green 2.0, a national organization focused on building racial diversity within the environmental movement. You can learn more about the fine work of Green 2.0 by visiting their website, diversegreen.org. That's diversegreen.org. And Jamie DeMarco, if you can pop that into the chat. Andres, it is so great to have you on this call. I know we worked hard in this last presidential campaign together, and now it's great to get your thoughts on where we are and where we're going.
Absolutely, Mike. Good evening, everyone else. Good evening. I'm extremely excited to be here. You put me right behind Mr. McKibben and Senator Van Hollen, two amazing climate champion leaders. And so you've only set me up for success, Mike. It was great working with you on this most previous race, and what an outcome. I think it's something, I think that, as I said at the beginning, we can all breathe a sigh of relief and just move forward. So again, my name is Andres Jimenez. I'm the executive director of Green 2.0. And I'd like to take a little bit of a step back as Bill was talking a little bit about the Obama administration, and kind of take back and think through a little bit about where we've been. So during the Obama administration, we were an environmental movement filled with the understanding that we knew the importance of the work we did. And it wasn't a question of what needed to be accomplished, but more so the question was, how do we get there? And what do we accomplish first? And that's where we were. Now, over the last 4 years, however, our goals, as well as our priorities, have shifted. They have been blanketed with fear and worry and the need to push back on regulation after regulation that was in danger of being taken away. So not to say there were no wins overall, but the environmental community and those passionate in this issue worked not to advance where we had gotten, but we had to persist to save what we had. Today, however, I'm happy to say we're at a different point. Today, my message to you on this call is one of hope. Hope that we can now look to the future and know that we will have an administration that is willing to work with us, willing to stand up and fight, and willing to accelerate the work that we need to achieve our goals, to save our future and change our lives. So what else I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is Congress. So what does this mean for Congress? Well, as mentioned earlier, we have in the House, we continue to have a blue House. We have a Democratic House in power. We need to continue to make sure and put pressure on our representatives to not only pass messaging bills, but to actually pass bills that will become law. We need these bills to be not only pushed through the House, but we need these bills to be pushed in the Senate. And so how does that happen? As Senator Van Hollen and Mike and Bill mentioned, the answer is not there yet. We still must wait on Georgia. There's still lots to wait for. There's lots that we can do as constituents to help out in that fight, to help out in Georgia, whether it's phone banking or writing letters. There's still lots to do, but while we wait, it's critical and it's important for us to look at the Senate champions that we do have. Those members, not only Democratic like Senator Van Hollen, but those senators across the aisle, Republican senators who have said, we are open to having this conversation. We are open to talking. We're open to seeing how these priorities for the environmental community would impact our state and our constituents. And so we must look at current champions. And where I would start, Mike, is by looking at the Bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. There we're going to find a few Republicans who have stood up this last Congress and said, let's talk about some of these issues, whether it's parks issues, ocean acidification issues, all sorts of issues, and said, I want to at least have that opening conversation. And in that, we must find hope, Mike. It is in those offices saying, we are not going to block you. We are not going to close the door. We are not going to say climate change is not permitted, but we want to sit down. We do want to have those conversations, and let's find a way to move forward. So we look at senators like Senator Murkowski, who just this Congress talked a lot about climate change, put it into her committee hearings and brought in scientists. We want to look at Senator Romney, Senator Braun, Senator Rubio, who had never been on a committee before. His first committee in Congress, guess what it is? It's the Climate Caucus Committee, right? So what does that say? It says they're listening. Does it mean that they're moving? That we're going to have to wait and see, Mike. But what it says is that the opportunity for conversations are there, and we need to take away from that a very positive message that we are, as the United States, as citizens, as advocates, we are moving forward. And so what I want to leave you with tonight is a sense of optimism. As a united front, we have the power to accelerate and move toward the change needed to make our world not only livable, but rich in beauty and abundant in resources for us and the generations ahead. And so thank you so much for letting me come on. I'm really excited about the future. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, and let's not stop here. Let's continue to engage with our state representatives, our federal representatives, and push for change.
Andres, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up, ready to go. Briefly, engagement from Hispanic voters was up everywhere in the United States, with mostly progressive outcomes, I think. But people point to Cuban American votes helping Trump in Florida, but also Hispanic votes overall clearly helped Biden in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania. What briefly is your takeaway of the number of Hispanic voters who turned out?
Mike, obviously a very optimistic, positive message from me this evening. I'm absolutely blown away by the number of Hispanic Americans that came out in record numbers to vote across the country. Step one was getting the Latino community to engage, to come out, to know that voting is how they have power, because when you vote, you're letting your voice be heard. And when the Latino community comes out to vote, it is saying to the rest of the country, we have a voice, we have a place, and this is what it sounds like. And so first off, amazing, amazing turnout. But what we do need to do, Mike, and we always can sharpen up, tune up what the work we do is, we need to reach out to those communities even more moving forward. And we need to let them know just exactly why issues like climate change, issues like environmental issues are important, not only to them, their family, and their communities. The more we educate and the more we let folks in the Hispanic community know that it's not just this issue that doesn't impact them, but it impacts them on a day-to-day basis, because as we've seen through many studies, Mike, who does climate change impact the most? Communities of color. And so we absolutely need to make sure that we're educating these communities, that we're giving them a reason to go out and vote for members of Congress and state officials that will represent them in their issues, represent the importance of fighting against climate change and making our atmosphere, our environment, and our communities a better place to live, a safer place to live, and a healthier place to live.
Andre Jimenez, Executive Director of Green 2.0, thank you so much. And we're going to hear in a moment about ongoing climate efforts on Capitol Hill a little bit more, and then we're going to pivot to what states like Maryland and Virginia can do. But before we do that, I want to make a couple of plugs for CCAN Action Fund, the group hosting this call tonight. Again, we're active throughout the region of Maryland, Virginia, DC, and across the country. We worked really hard to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, endorsing them in September, then writing 17,000 letters to Pennsylvania, making over 30,000 calls into North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And I personally knocked on doors in West Philadelphia during the 3 days leading up to the election, as did many of our volunteers and many of you who knocked on doors. Thank you so much. If you would like to support our work, please visit ccanactionfund.org. That's ccanactionfund.org, and click on the donate button. We can do more with the more resources that we have. So thank you for that. More importantly, however, why not join us on our 15th annual Polar Bear Plunge on Saturday, February 13th. This is our biggest fundraiser of the year, and with social distancing this year, we're making it a virtual plunge. We usually jump into the Potomac River in DC in the dead of winter, but this year we're inviting folks across the region and across the country to go into their own backyards on February 13th and take the Climate Bucket Challenge with an ice water bucket of water, or find a local pond or a local creek and videotape yourself taking a quick dip. You can learn more at keepwintercold.org. That's keepwintercold.org. And this year, Bill McKibben is joining us for the festivities. Reverend Lennox Yearwood of Hip Hop Caucus will be joining us. And again, sign up now to be part of this at keepwintercold.org. Mark your calendar, February 13th. Now, I want to turn this over to Jamie DeMarco. He is the Federal and Maryland Policy Director for CCAN Action Fund. In the past, Jamie has worked for the Clean Energy Jobs Initiative in Maryland and as a campaign coordinator for state action at the Citizens Climate Lobby in Washington, D.C. Jamie will update you on what CCAN and CCAN Action Fund are working on Capitol Hill and the upcoming legislative session in Annapolis. For those of you joining from outside the region, I think you'll find these state policy discussions helpful even wherever your state is. So Jamie, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. And I really feel butterflies being on this call with everyone. We have been working for this for so long. You know, when you run a campaign, you think years ahead, you enumerate your steps, step 1, step 2, step 3. And the very last step in every campaign is go win the policy. Sometimes people think winning the policy is like the first biggest step, but it's really like kind of the cherry on top. Like once you've run your whole campaign, and set yourself up for success, the last thing you do is you go and you win. And we have been working for so long to elect a president who will make climate a priority. And now we finally have one. And the only thing we have left to do is win. For the first time, I honestly feel like we're beating the fossil fuel industry on Capitol Hill. We have the lead. And if we can just sprint for the next few months, then we can win. And we will actually have to sprint, because even if we have the lead, the fossil fuel executives are right on our heels, and they could catch us at any minute. And that's why CCAN is going to throw everything we have at Capitol Hill in the coming weeks and months. We've already accomplished a lot. We've spent the last year building up congressional leaders who oppose any attempt to release the fossil fuel industry from liability. Just backing up, saying things we all know, but to go over it again, Exxon, Shell, Chevron, BP, the whole list knew the catastrophic science of climate change nearly a half century ago. And instead of warning us, they lied and lied and lied and lied. And now climate costs are coming due in municipal budgets. Counties are having to install ACs in schools that never needed them before. Cities have to redesign their whole stormwater management system because they weren't built for the kind of rainfall events that we're seeing now. All of this is costing money, and these counties, cities, states are suing the fossil fuel industry, saying, you have to pay. It's a simple case. All they're saying is, you had a deadly defect to your product. You knew, you lied, and now you have to pay for the damages. It's really straightforward. But of course, the fossil fuel industry is working behind the scenes to try and make Congress pass a law that will require the taxpayers to foot the bill instead of them. So we've done everything we can to immunize members of Congress against the toxic idea of making us pay rather than them pay. So we got Congressman Raskin to write a Dear Colleague letter urging Congress never to give in to the fossil fuel industry on this. And I remember when we were working on that letter, we said, let's set a goal of getting 20 people to co-sign it and maybe a reach goal of 40. And we ended up getting 60 members of Congress to put their name on that letter. And as a direct result of our work, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis included language in their report that explicitly said Congress should not trade away fossil fuel liability. We actually talked to the committee staff early on in the process, and they told us they weren't planning to include anything about liability. Then we did our work. We wrote that Dear Colleague letter. We lobbied. We did everything else, and they put the language in there. So CCAN and CCAN Action Fund are already moving mountains on Capitol Hill. We're going to keep up on our Exxon new work in the next Congress. But in addition, we're going to go on offensive. If Democrats end up controlling the Senate, we are going to pass the Clean Air Act of our time in the next 9 months. We're going to put all our grassroots energy, or a lot of it, into West Virginia, like Bill said earlier. Joe Manchin might end up being the lowest common denominator, and we're going to need him to go bold on climate through reconciliation, budget fights, something, whatever, even if we can't get rid of the filibuster. But we are going to push all the senators in our region to eliminate the filibuster so McConnell cannot stop us. And we'll fight for the Biden plan. We're going to fight off bad amendments. We're going to fight for good amendments, and we're going to fight to get it across the finish line. And I know everyone on this call is ready to join that fight. If Democrats don't control the Senate, we're still going to be in for the fight of our lives. We're going to have to push Biden to do everything he can on executive orders, and we're going to still have congressional work. Even in the most polarized Congress, there are a few bills that pass every year. We have to make sure that every bill that moves through Congress puts another few $100 million or few $100 billion towards the climate fight. We have to build the pressure on Nancy Pelosi to the point that she will shut down the government rather than pass a budget without a major climate provision. And if the Ds don't control the Senate, we're going to have to go back to what we always do best anyway, which is working at the state level, both in our region and beyond. And we know our region really matters. Between DC, Maryland, and Virginia, we house the federal government. Our jurisdictions govern all the pillows that every staffer lays their head on at night. And the policies we enact locally get headlines in local papers that cabinet officials and legislative directors see. Right now in Maryland, we need to up the ante. Our current greenhouse gas reduction goals are not in line with the science. Under current law, Maryland has to reduce our emissions 40% below 2006 levels by 2030. And it also says, like, maybe if you want to shoot for 80%, if you feel like it, but if not, no biggie. That's not good enough. The recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said wealthy states and wealthy nations need to reduce their emissions at least 60% by 2030 and carbon neutrality by at least 2045. Measured by median income, Maryland is actually the wealthiest state in the wealthiest nation on earth. So we need to up the goals. And that's why this year in Annapolis, Chairman Pinsky will introduce a bill that will require Maryland to reduce our emissions 60 by 30 and net neutral by 2045. Not only that, it will require a commission on equity to determine what percentage of the state's funds must be invested in frontline Black and Brown communities. And we're modeling that portion of the bill after the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is widely seen as the EJ gold standard. It was introduced last year as the Climate Solutions Act. It passed out of 2 committees with bipartisan support. It was on track to pass when COVID ended the legislative session prematurely, but we're going to get it back. We are the climate organization for the region of our nation's capital. We will pass state legislation to influence our federal government, and we will descend on our federal government to make sure they pass the sweeping climate legislation that we need.
Thank you, Jamie DeMarco. Okay, I'm ready. Jamie is, again, CCAN Action Fund's federal and Maryland policy director, and we really appreciate those words. And last but not least, we're going to hear next from CCAN Action Fund's Virginia director, Kim Germain. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Kim grew up in Virginia, where she attended Mary Washington University and got a master's degree in public policy from Regent University in Virginia Beach. Kim most recently worked as policy coordinator at the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. Kim, welcome to CCAN Action Fund and welcome to this call.
Hi, everybody. As Mike said, my name is Kim Germain, and I'm the Virginia Director for CCAN here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I've had the benefit of being at the forefront of electoral issue advocacy and public policy work in Virginia for the last 7 years. I know most of you are here focused on the presidential election and what it means for federal legislation, so I'll keep my comments short. One thing is for sure, the uncertainty surrounding the balance of power in the Senate has highlighted the need to continue to move the ticker forward and prioritize climate action on the statewide level. Fortunately, here in Virginia, our trajectory looks promising. This past legislative session, we took vital strides toward reducing carbon emissions from the energy sector by joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and passing the comprehensive Virginia Clean Economy Act. Moving forward, we hope to make good on the goals set forth in the Clean Economy Act and build on the massive victory of the canceled Atlantic Coast Pipeline by passing a fossil fuel moratorium and halting further build out of dirty energy infrastructure. Fossil fuel projects have endangered the health and well-being of our communities and public spaces for far too long. And the reality is that with our goals, they are no longer necessary to power our Commonwealth. A fossil fuel moratorium is imperative to the creation of a clean and just energy future. As we head into 2021, we also hope to tackle the significant pollution associated with the transportation sector, which is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions here in Virginia. We hope to join forces with the 14 other states who have already adopted California Clean Car Standards. And we are working actively to modernize our transit system and make public transit more efficient, reliable, accessible, and equitable. Both electrification and a shift to transit-oriented communities will aid in the reduction of transportation-related emissions. We've also started the long overdue work to prioritize environmental justice here in Virginia. Last year, we worked to codify the statewide council and definitions for environmental justice, and will continue the work to refine that language in the coming year. We want to ensure that frontline communities are considered in the work of statewide agencies, and that those agencies develop relevant environmental justice policies for their work. We also want to make sure that impacted communities are provided access and input in the utility regulatory process so that we can take stock of potential adverse impacts before projects begin. Through these legislative priorities, we hope to add Virginia's voice to the resounding call for immediate and comprehensive climate action. We have a mandate. We know that voters are looking for their legislators to act on climate change. We know that they're voting on climate action, and we cannot put the work off any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. And as you can see, especially if Democrats do not control the U.S. Senate, we'll need progressive states from East Coast to West Coast to do everything they can to prepare to pass as much of the Biden climate agenda as possible at the local level, with help from a supportive White House and with key focus on environmental justice. So in the meantime, again, if you want to help out in Georgia, Jamie, why don't you post the Georgia links again to Fair Fight and to Vote Forward. And if you are interested in joining the CCAN Polar Bear Plunge that's coming up on February 13th, please go to keepwintercold.org. If you're interested in joining Bill McKibben and others at stopthemoneypipeline.org and getting involved in that, please do so. And Bill, before I wrap up, Bill McKibben, thank you for sticking around. I just wonder if, having heard all the speakers here tonight, if you have any closing thoughts for us, words of wisdom, hope to send us off with.
We've been fighting hard on climate change for 30 years. It's going to take, it's going to take another 30 years to get this job done. But the next 3 or 4 are probably the most important of that whole span. We've got to get things in place, and that means we got to push everywhere we can. And I think for Americans, that means Washington, and it means Wall Street, and it means state and local capitals. We got plenty of work to do. We've got the wind at our back, not just the electoral wind, but the fact that the price of a solar panel or a wind turbine have dropped 90% in the last decade. We can do this. It's never going to be easy. The fossil fuel industry remains incredibly powerful. They own one of our political parties. And so it's going to be up to us to figure out creatively how to take them on. But we've done all right, In the last decade, we've made a big dent. And in the decade to come, we'll hopefully take that dent and open it up into a real beachhead that we can carry the day. So that's what I got. Keep in your hearts, all the people in Central America who are dealing with the after effects of the 28th hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season. Keep in your hearts the people in Florida who are dealing with it now. And, on we go. We got to do what we can to limit the damage and build the future.
Thank you, Bill. And Bill, you have my cell number. Every time in the last 15 years, Bill McKibben asked me to get arrested or go here or go there. I don't hesitate, and nor should the rest of us. So Bill, I look forward to working with you more. I don't see Senator Van Hollen. I've texted a couple of people on my staff to see if they see him. Am I right that he was not able to stick around to give any closing comments? Okay. Again, look, it's about time to wrap this call up. If you posted a question in the chat room, we will get back to you with a written response. And again, we can celebrate a huge win last week. Trump is gone. That's really going to happen. And the Biden-Harris commitment to climate change is ambitious. It's real. So let's work with them at every turn from this day forward. Again, how to get started, fairfight.com/join-our-fight. That's Stacey Abrams' group in Georgia. Stopthemoneypipeline.org, CCANactionfund.org. Please donate. And more than anything, if you've never done the polar bear plunge with CCAN, this is your year. It's time to do it. It's fun. You can do it in your backyard. You can do it in the creek around the corner. Help us. Go to keepwintercold.org. It's fun. It's like an AIDS walk or a breast cancer bike-a-thon. You just get your friends to support you. We are ambitious this year. Our goal is to raise $200,000. We need your help. And on that day of the plunge, you will hear from our friend Bill McKibben again, Reverend Lennox Yearwood of Hip Hop Caucus. And may I offer just a final thought before we close? Time is almost up for a swift and transformative clean energy revolution. We know that. But here's what gives me hope. And I think a lot of us are celebrating, but are also looking for more hope. Here's mine. Last week, in the middle of a pandemic, with a hate-spewing president explicitly trying to push disruptive chaos into the voting process, our country at every level and in every state conducted an incredibly smooth and fair election with record turnout. So yes, despite 4 years of Trump, Americans can still come together to do great things against long odds for a common good. We did it this past week by preserving our democracy. Now let's do it over the next 4 years to preserve our one and only life-giving climate. Make the climate fight part of your life. Stay active with CCAN and CCAN Action Fund, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.
And get behind Andre's work too, because it's really important, man.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody.